Hi, welcome to Midwest Magic Cleaning. My name is 8675309. And this week we're cleaning a hoarded house for free, a pretty severely hoarded one. It took us 5 days to do what you're about to see us do, and there's a lot of information to cover, so this will probably be a long-ish video. I can tell you that if I were to teach a class on hoarding disorder, this would be the most quintessential example that I would bring up. It is the most common that I find, and it has all the hallmarks of what you would expect to see in somebody with hoarding disorder. So in order to understand what's going on, you need to understand that the most important word in the phrase hoarding disorder is disorder. I think a lot of people think of hoarding disorder as someone who just is greedy and frivolous and buys a whole bunch of junk that they don't need, and they just don't throw things away, and it's more of like a choice than a disorder. So I'm going to explain it to you in the most basic layman terms that I can. In the front of your brain, there are two lobes, and those two lobes are often associated with heavy decision making and emotional control, or more aptly, emotional regulation. Hoarding disorder is a neuropsychological problem, which means basically that there is a physical problem with the brain that has a psychological outcome, a sort of psychological side effect. In people with hoarding disorder, those two lobes that regulate those two things often have very diminished activity when compared to just the neurotypical person. So even if they're not currently hoarding, that condition is always present. That's why they say once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Even if you quit drinking, you're still an alcoholic because the condition that causes it is still there. The interesting thing about hoarding disorder is that it's often triggered by an extreme trauma, a death of a spouse or a child, the loss of a really, really good loved career, maybe a house burns down. After that traumatic event, that's typically when hoarding disorder really kicks in, and that's when you can start to see the collection and the inability to throw things away. Even useless garbage like old boxes and toilet paper and your mom. In this case, the hoarding disorder really started to present itself heavily not long after this gentleman's wife passed away more than a decade ago. Once that happened, he was trying to cope in any way that he could. And there's sort of a control that you have whenever you're able to just go to a yard sale or an auction and just buy something frivolous or goofy or just collectible. It gives you a dopamine hit. It makes you feel better. And there's a control that you have over those objects that you didn't have control over in real life, such as death. That's really, really common in hoarding disorder, and that's exactly what this guy started to do. He started collecting and buying things. He would bring them home, set them on the table, and just kind of walk off. And then over the course of years, it just kept piling up until it's in the condition that you see it in now. So we'll go back to the nodes again, because in this disorder, there's a sort of crosswire that happens that makes a person attach emotion to objects. Because they're filling the void of loss with these objects, they start to become more and more attached to them, even if they're worthless. And that can get so powerful that if we were to throw something away, it would be on par with throwing one of his pets away. In really, really severe cases, it can be like throwing one of their kids away. Now, because this guy is in the heart of hoarding disorder and he's never had therapy, we can't get rid of anything. It causes a special circumstance for us that makes it really, really hard. That's what she said. We can't throw anything away unless it's actual trash. To make matters even more difficult, a lot of the stuff in this house is genuinely collectible. There's a lot of antiques. We'll go over all the stuff we found here in just a little bit. It was pretty mind-blowing. But there's a lot of important stuff, and it's kind of just scattered everywhere, so we have to go through everything. So in this video, we're not as concerned about the cleaning aspect as we are prioritizing safety and space. But again, in order to do that, we have to go through absolutely everything to make sure we're not throwing away anything that's important. And then to add to that problem, all of his collections were scattered around so kind of willy-nilly. Well, a little bit nilly, not so much willy. But we had to consolidate all those things into tubs. So for instance, he had at least 500 knives, if not 1,000. But there were 50 in this room. There were 100 in this other room. There were some in boxes and some in tubs. That meant that at any given time, we had to have anywhere from 5 to 10 empty tubs setting all all over the house so that we could put objects with like objects. So all knives in one tub, or in his case, like 5 tubs. All paperwork in another tub. All books in another tub. I think by the time we were done with this, we went through something like 50 Rubbermaid tubs. So suck it. So what you're seeing in this sink is something we run into all the time when dealing with this disorder. The dishes sit and they pile up, and then they get to a point to where they're so piled up, it becomes overwhelming to do. And so it exacerbates the problem. So putting things off becomes a bigger pile, which causes you to put them off even more, and it just snowballs. Usually there's some water in the bottom of the sink, which there was in this one too. It becomes almost clogged up with all the weight of the stuff on it. And then silverware sits there for so long in that water that they literally dissolve. I picked up a couple spoons that I could have snapped with 2 fingers. That causes 3 problems, especially in this house. One is black mold. The other one is rust and dissolved food. And the other one is extremely hard water. So the black mold attaches itself to the hard water stains, which is calcium and lime. And then it becomes almost impossible to get out without removing the lime scale. So what we did was we treated it with lime away, allowed it to set for quite a while, and I just kept going back to it and spraying it down, using a scratch pad to scrub it, then spraying it down with lime away again over and over and over until it came off. Like even a paint scraper doesn't work that well to get this off. You really need to dissolve it. You'll see in a little bit that he has the same problem with his bathtub and his toilet. Black mold attaches itself to the lime scale and calcium, and then it just becomes this sheet of black rock. Another really common problem that we run into over and over again is broken plumbing. He had no hot water. If you can turn on the hot water from the hot water heater, but it leaks, and so he has to keep that shut down until he absolutely needs it. The toilet doesn't function at all. The sink in the bathroom barely functions, and his bathtub didn't drain, so I poured a whole bunch of really powerful Drano and unclogged his thing for him. I think the reason that was clogged was a combination of hair and probably the same built-up lime scale. But no matter how you look at it, he's going to have to gut the bathroom. I talked to his son about it, and really the bathtub, the sink, the toilet, the floors, all that stuff needs to come out and be rebuilt. You'll see it when I get there. So be patient, man. Now, some of the upsides to this house were that he allowed us to get rid of almost all the dishes because they really were ruined. There was no saving those. And he allowed us to get rid of the expired food, which is good because the oldest thing that we found was a can of something. I don't remember what it was, condensed milk or something from 2006. But the majority of the expired food happened in 2014, as in they expired in 2014, which means they were likely bought in 2013. And the sad part is that's when his wife passed away. So as you're cleaning this house, you can see when the problems actually started. And as sad as that is, it's fascinating from a psychological perspective because it's kind of like archaeology. It's like a psychological archaeology that just by seeing the expiration dates, it gives a timestamp on when the problems really started to occur. But I was really proud of him for letting that stuff go, especially because there were a bunch of old jars of tomato sauce that were hand canned, and those were marked 2012, which means that his wife likely canned those and then like a year later or 6 months later passed away. And those have been sitting on a shelf ever since. And I'd asked him if I could get rid of them, and he was cool about letting me toss those. There's a lot of cases where that doesn't happen, where they can't let it go because it's the last remnants of something that they did by hand. It was a product of them before they passed away. Now, that being said, there's a whole bunch of stuff that we needed to do that we didn't get to yet because our priorities were on safety and space. So not only was his food a decade old, but so was the dust on his ceiling fans and a whole bunch of trinkets and shelving units and couches. We cleaned some of that up and we did some basic cleaning in the bathroom. We didn't do a deep clean by any means. But after doing what we did, we're going to give him a few weeks to settle and get his head wrapped around it and see if there's anything he can get rid of. For instance, he's got a lot of his wife's old clothing and a whole bunch of collections that he knows he doesn't really need. He knows he wants to get rid of them. And then once some more space is made, we're going to go back in there and do a deep clean from ceiling to floors. I think that would make a pretty cool follow-up video because so far while we've been cleaning, he has not brought a single thing into the house. No new auctions, no new yard sales, no flea markets, and everything has stayed clean. There's been no dirty dishes in the sink. The stove has been pristine. There's not even a crumb on the countertops. I know for a fact he's cleaned some stuff, even though we told him don't bother cleaning because we'll clean it all on video. I don't mind that he did some cleaning because it shows that he's got motivation to do it. It means he's got the drive to push himself forward. And it's in small ways that I'm impressed. So he had a box. You'll see it on the kitchen counter. It says McCafe on it, and it's just Keurig cups of McDonald's coffee. I left those up there so they could be an easy reach, and on the second day, he actually took those out of the box and put them in a K-cup holder that he has on his kitchen counter. Now, that may not seem like much to the average person, but for somebody who's living with this disorder and somebody who's living in these conditions, that is a huge, huge step. It means he's with the process, and that is so incredibly rare to see when dealing with hoarding disorder that it's something that I feel like I need to call attention to, and it's an action that I think deserves some recognition. Some of the things, however, that are hoarding disorder 101, I see over and over and over again, which is him attaching a monetary value to objects that is maybe a bit unreasonable. So he would be correct in saying that this object is worth $100, but what he's not considering, or I'm assuming he's not considering, is that it would be worth $100 if it was in pristine condition and you sold it directly to a collector. So in those cases, it has the potential to make $100, but in actuality, finding the actual collector who's willing to pay that money takes a lot of time and effort and marketing. So what ends up happening in most of these cases are the parent will collect a whole bunch of stuff and they'll think, well, if I pass away, my kids can sell it and make thousands and thousands of dollars. But the problem is, let's take his knives, for example. He's got anywhere from 500 to 1,000 knives, and several of those knives he claims are worth about $500, which I could totally see. However, when the family inherits those things, they're inheriting just hundreds and hundreds of knives, and unless they're experts in the monetary value of knives in those conditions, they would have to bring in an expert and pay that expert to find the good ones versus the bad ones. Since nobody has time to do that, especially when dealing with the grief of a family member that's passed away. What often happens instead is that they will auction off everything that they can, and all 500 or 1,000 or however many knives he's got will likely be sold so cheap that each knife would be valued at about 10 cents each. Because a lot of times they'll just sell off these whole collections for like $100. He has a ton of really old Western style comics that, again, if we're presented to a collector and the collector picked out the ones that were really good and bought them individually, you might get a pretty decent amount of money for them. What actually happens is that they're almost always sold as a lot in an auction, and somebody, again, will pay $50 for 150 comics, especially since a lot of the comics that he has are not stored properly in order to ensure that they stay pristine. Instead, they've just been, a lot of them have been just stacked in piles. And so the acid from the paper ends up causing them to yellow and get brittle. Sometimes just moving them around causes the pages to tear or the staples to disconnect. A lot of antique books that he had were just in tubs laying underneath the weight of a bunch of other books. And because of that, they had the same exact condition, yellowed, foxing. Some of them had white mold. So in keeping the things the way that they keep them, a lot of times people with hoarding disorder will take a collection that could be valuable, but because of the method in which they stored them, they ruin the object's value. I've cleaned houses like these before that had baseball card collections that in mint condition would be worth tens of thousands of dollars. But because they were just stored loosely in a basement, they ended up getting wrinkled. The humidity of the basement caused them to get warped, and then black mold grew on everything and just totally ruined them and made them worthless. Which leads me to another thing that I find extremely common in households that have this affliction, is that in 75% of the cases, literally 3/4 of the cases of people I help, they're on oxygen or some sort of breathing apparatus. Now, in a lot of those cases, the reason for that is because they've got a legitimate medical issue. But in most of the cases that I've worked in, the conditions of the house, if not causing it directly, definitely contribute to the breathing problems in the first place. They're living in a house that's covered in 1/2 inch of dust and dog fur and cat fur, and the sink is covered in black mold. The bathrooms are saturated in black mold. When we picked up the clothes from the floor in his bedroom, the bottom 1/3 of that pile was completely saturated in white mold. Now, whether that's causing the breathing issues or not is up for debate. That's for the doctor to figure out. But it's definitely not helping the problem. So what I usually find is that the day after we clean and we leave, the person's breathing problems may actually get a little bit worse for the first day because we kicked a bunch of dust up into the air, and as we're throwing clothes away, we're going to be kicking up some mold spores here and there. But in many, many cases, the second day after we leave, they report their breathing getting better. And it totally makes sense because we've cleaned that stuff up so it's no longer an allergen that's going directly into their lungs. It's why I never brush my moose around people who are on oxygen, because the moose fur and the moose dandruff gets into the air, and the next thing you know, that person's coughing up moose balls. Please don't say moose balls. That sounds inappropriate. Shut up, you stupid moose! But if you find yourself in that same situation where you're having trouble breathing, concentrate on the dusty areas, and I usually use a Swiffer because the dust sticks to the Swiffer pads, and then use a vacuum that's got a filter that's meant for pets. Not vacuuming the pets directly, that's weird, but one that's meant for like pet dander and pet hair on carpets. Those filters are usually pretty good to filter out all the fine particles that cause breathing problems in the first place. If that doesn't work, just try suplexing your dog and tell him, "You dander my house again, son. You're getting a stone cold stunner." "Oh, hell yeah." I am so sorry about that. I did not mean to do that. One of the hardest parts of cleaning up a hoard like this is everything is usually piled in a sand dune shape where it's shallow on the edges but deep in the middle, and it makes it to where it's really hard to unpile the pile without causing an avalanche of crap. A crap-alanche, if you will. Oh, and you will. Now, if it's just paperwork or it's just a bunch of old McDonald's bags or something, who cares? You can let that stuff go everywhere because you're going to be picking it up anyway. But when dealing with a hoard like this, it's exceptionally hard because not only does this have a bunch of antiques in it, it also happened to have a ton of guns and ammunition. Now, fortunately, none of them were loaded. Most of them had trigger guards and the safeties were on all of them, so at least there was that. But no, they weren't stored very well at all, and they really need to be. There's no kids in the house or anything, so we don't have to worry about that. But I mean, I, as a cleaner, don't want to accidentally grab something thinking it's an old bottle of cologne because I can only see part of the side of it, and then accidentally grab it, by the trigger by accident, or get the trigger to hook on to something else as I'm trying to pull it out. So again, fortunately, they weren't loaded, but you can never ever be too careful with that stuff. It's why I'm ultra careful with the knives too, because sometimes I'll just pick up 4 or 5 random objects on a table and start juggling them. It's kind of a compulsion I have. And if I'm doing that with knives, not knowing they're knives when I pick them up, I don't notice it until too late. And then the next thing you know, I try to slap one out of the air so it doesn't stab me. And it goes shooting across the room and hits Jason in the chest. Then he starts crying and I got to explain that to his wife and his mom. And it's just an ordeal. I don't want to deal with that. Now, I hear a lot of people in many, many videos saying things like, well, why doesn't he just stop buying stuff? Or why doesn't his family step in and take control of his finances? I get that a lot. And to me, that's on par with saying to a depressed person, why don't they just stop being sad? It's like saying, well, you've got a nice family, you've got a good job, you got people who loves you. What do you have to be sad about? and they're confusing sadness with depression. Sadness is an emotion, depression is an affliction. Treating depression oftentimes makes you confront the traumas that caused the depression in the first place or triggered the depression. Treating alcoholism just isn't about quitting drinking, it's recognizing the triggers that cause you to relapse and forces you to confront a life without using that alcohol as a crutch. Therapy for hoarding disorder is never about trying to get the person to just stop buying stuff. That's a symptom of a bigger issue. Most of the time, the treatment is centered around them confronting old traumas that led to the trigger of the hoarding disorder. Part of that treatment might involve cognitive behavioral therapy, where they teach them to develop a routine of replacing the buying of things with something else, to recognize triggers and stop the compulsion at its root. The most important question that I get asked, and one of the more frequent ones, is how do I address someone with hoarding disorder? How can I get them to clean up? How can I get them to let me clean up? I've tried and tried and tried, and they just won't let me do it. In my experience, the only way that you can do it is to treat it like an alcoholic's intervention. Now, I'm not going to go through the steps of that because that's easily researched on your own through Google, and I don't want to give any sort of information that's wrong or misleading because that can set you up for failure, and I don't want to be responsible for that. However, I can tell you that in almost every case I have ever seen, the worst way to go about it is to push them into it, to say it as an accusation, to say, this is ridiculous. Your house looks like hell. You can't live like this. This is disgusting. You have to clean it up. What people often don't talk about whenever they're discussing this order is that there is a heavy control factor involved. Once somebody has been lost from the family, so in this case, his wife passed away, he's lost control of that part of his life. It's been taken from him. When he's buying things or picking up stuff from the side of the road or he's collecting things, there is a control in that where this is my stuff. I can put it where I want. I can buy what I want. It makes me feel good. Nobody can come in here and take this stuff away from me because it's mine. They don't outright think that. It's more subconscious. In the back of their head, it's sort of a buzzing feeling of the world took away the love of my life. They can't take this stuff away from me because this stuff can't pass away. I control it going into my house, and I can control when it leaves my house. No one else can do that for me. So when you push them like that and you make it an accusation and a confrontation, that's where the emotional regulation part that we talked about earlier comes into play. You will trigger their fight or flight response. They will either say, I don't care, you just do whatever you want then, and they'll leave. And they'll leave you to do all the cleanup and stuff, and then they'll just resent you for it. Or they'll push back and they will get emotionally manipulative or angry or extremely confrontational. The absolute worst way to handle it is to wait until they're gone on vacation or in the hospital and then clean it up while they're gone. There have been documented cases of people harming themselves after that's been done. Again, most of them are not looking at these objects as this is a form of potential money or income that I can have later, even though they might say that out loud. In their head, they're equating this to, you came into my house and threw away my dog, or you came into my house and stole my child. There's an emotional attachment that's illogical to the inanimate object. They're not doing it on purpose. They're not making a choice to have that connection. That's why it's a disorder. I've lost track of the number of people who have told me that they grew up with a parent who was a hoarder, and that parent would punish them or yell at them if that child tried to clean up their own room, or if they tried to pick up trash and throw it away, or tried to organize in any manner. Those kids have grown up in a life where if they tried to do that or tried to talk their parents into getting some help, the parent's fight or flight response leans more toward fight when dealing with children because they're an authority figure over the child. So they've learned over time that there's a tone of voice they can use or a volume of voice that they can use to sort of beat that person emotionally into submission to where the person just stops trying because they don't want to fight, they don't want to argue, they don't want to be yelled at, so they just give in. And that continues clear through adulthood. Because of that, I think the best way to go about it would be to contact a professional before you even confront the person with hoarding disorder to find out how to handle it. Because what it boils down to is you have to let them know that you're concerned in a firm way, but isn't like confrontational, that isn't accusing them. And to be able to bring up things like, I know you haven't taken a shower in ages because I can see your bathtub. Your toilet doesn't work. Half your house doesn't have electricity. You have plumbing issues. There's mold growing in here. There's cockroaches. There's mice, which, by the way, this house had none of that. He didn't have open food out that was outside of a can. There was no crumbs or anything. So there was no mice, no bugs, no vermin. But in most houses, that's what we do find is a whole bunch of infestations. But anyway, back to the confronting or the intervention, you have to be solid enough to let them know that I can't come in here. I can't bring my kids in here because it's not safe. And I personally don't know how to do that without contacting a professional like a psychiatrist, but specifically someone who's been trained in dealing with people with hoarding disorder. And sometimes that is super, super hard to find. But again, I'm not telling you the steps of the intervention or how to do it. I'm just telling you what to expect and kind of what mind frame you're going to have to be in when you go into it. But as far as the actual intervention itself, definitely research. Are these both done?
Yep.
Okay, let me get this kind of out of here for a second. When we're done with these, I think we're pretty much done with this room, and then I'll have you do the floors real quick, and then we'll move our way into that other room. If you're wondering where this house ranks, it's not the worst one we've ever done on the channel, but hoarding is divided into 5 levels of hoarding, or 5 stages of hoarding, and then there's 9 stages of clutter. You can find both online, and you can find out what designates each level. This one would be right on the cusp of level 4. And that does bring me to one of the harsher realities of cleaning a house like this, especially whenever you can't throw anything away. beyond trash. When we're doing this, since our main priority is space and safety, it means we have to move the hoard out of the rooms that it's currently in, and it has to go somewhere. Since it can't go into a dumpster yet, and I'm hoping that word yet means something. I'm hoping it lets us do something with this in the future. But it has to go somewhere, and so oftentimes what we do is we find rooms that they're not using anyway and just move the hoard into there and make it stacked and boxed up and put into tubs, labeled, and then at least stacked in an organized way. We actually had to do that with 2 unused bedrooms in this house just to make it to where he can walk from one room to another without having to climb over things or dodge boxes or worry about knocking things off of tables. At the end of the video, one of the before and after shots will show one of those rooms that we had to rehoard. It basically boils down to playing Tetris with household objects. I hate doing that because not only is it just moving the hoard from one room to another, I mean, we're doing more than that. We're doing some pretty extreme organizing and consolidation, but the shift in weight by itself runs the risk of snapping floor joists or snapping subfloor. Because remember, you may be putting a box in there that only weighs 25 or 30 pounds, but whenever you stack 4 of those on top of each other, now you're going 80 to 120 pounds. And then you get row after row after row of those. Eventually that adds up. But most of the boxes that we're doing aren't just 20 or 30 pounds. There was a box of ammunition that was so heavy it took both Jason and I using all of our strength just to scoot it. We couldn't pick it up off the floor, but we could scoot it. Those tubs full of knives are extremely heavy. It took both of us to carry those into the other room. Tubs of books can be a couple 100 pounds. So by the time we get everything moved into another room, we try to spread it out as much as possible so that it's not all weight pushing down on just a small section of floor. But I mean, you're still talking about thousands of pounds worth of objects in these rooms now, and eventually that could cave a floor in. Regular watchers, I haven't done this in a while because we actually haven't had a full-on cleaning video in a while because I've been taking care of my own house for, I don't know, like 3 months, maybe 4. Well, you definitely don't have to worry about that now because we're full-on back into cleaning again. My house is good until they do the floors. That's the only thing I have left. So let's go back to what we normally do in a cleaning like this, and toward the end of the video, I give shout-outs to some of the channels that I watch on the down low, son. Hell, that I watch them on the up low. On the up high, because that's how I roll. These are channels that if you watch me, you'll probably like some of these. I don't know. I like them. So anyway, the first one that I really like is a channel I just discovered within the last week called Ian on YouTube. I don't know what it is about him. He has got the most wholesome, fun personality. He's not like a big entertainer type of YouTube channel. It's just a dude working at 7-Eleven, and he kind of documents and vlogs his days, and it's so cool to just hang out with him while he does his stuff. It's simple. It's to the point. If you like Post 10, you'll probably like this guy because they have kind of the same personality. I really like watching him. All the links to these channels will be in the description, by the way. The second one, again, another one I just discovered about a few days ago, actually, is called Once Upon a Playthrough. You will only like this if you like Stardew Valley or indie games. But it's a guy who, again, wholesome dude. He's super fun to just listen to, and he's playing Stardew Valley, but he's playing it for the first time. And that is so rare to find somebody just now getting into Stardew Valley. So he's discovering all the stuff that regular players discovered like 80 years ago. I don't remember how long the game's been out, but quite a while ago. And it's just fun watching him just get the excitement of playing through the game for the first time. Third channel I want to call out is one I've called out a few times before on the channel. It's Lawn Care Juggernaut. I love Lawn Care Juggernaut so much. He is one of the first, if not the first, lawn care for free channels on all of YouTube. He's the one who basically started off the whole movement of people doing lawn care for free. And he's just a super cool guy. He's funny. He looks like you wouldn't want to meet him in a dark alley. Like he would just suplex you through a wall. But he's the nicest, biggest teddy bear ever. And it's such a fun channel. Definitely check him out. And the last one is a cleaning channel. She does more like her own home cleaning, but she's super real and super down to earth, and her name is Jamie Chaotic. If that is her real name. I hope it is, because Jamie Chaotic would be a badass name to have. I have no actual real information to base this on, but every time I watch her, I feel like I'm hanging out with my smart-ass aunt. There's no reason for me to think that whatsoever, but that's what I think. And I love hanging out with her while she does her thing, and I think you guys will too. If you check out any of these channels, let them know Midwest Magic Cleaning sent you, mainly because my ego is tiny and I would like them to know where you came from. So suck it. And hey, while I'm at it, I might as well throw in a plug for my own stuff. My Instagram is linked in the description of this video. It's just Midwest Magic Cleaning. And I've actually been using it quite a lot lately. It's a whole bunch of me posing in different outfits, basically. I'm kind of trying to dress my age as I get, like I'll be 51 in March. So I'm trying to kind of stray away from the jeans and t-shirt look and dress like, I don't know, what people expect a 51-year-old to dress like. Mainly a giant sombrero and assless chaps. Look, I know all chaps are assless, but I am never going to stop saying assless chaps because it's just funny. Come on, man. But basically, I'll just put on an outfit that I think looks good, take a picture. If I find something funny in the real world, I'll take a picture of that, but I actually do use it from time to time. All right, enough of that nonsense. Let's get back to this house. So when we're doing this is one of the skill sets that not a lot of people have. And they ask me all the time, especially on Facebook, where I don't do full videos. I've got a company that does like little clips of videos, so people don't know what the channel's about. They just know they've seen clips on. Anyway, I get messages all the time from people asking how to physically go about cleaning these hoards up. And when they're like this, the only thing you can do is clear off the spot that you're wanting to clean. So for instance, we'll take all the stuff off the table and we'll pack them away, the stuff that we know they're not going to use, that they're just collecting. So anything that's going to be used, like ink pens or notebooks that they're clearly writing things down on, we'll keep those out. But the stuff that they're just collecting, we'll pack those away, and then we just have to set them aside wherever we can. until we clean the next spot off. So in this case, we were taking stuff off of the table and packing them away. Then eventually we had to go into the back bedroom that we had designated as kind of the storage room. We called it the Hoard room. So that's where we're going to move the Hoard to. We have to clean that room up first and get everything stacked and boxed and organized so that we can bring more stuff into that room and hoard it as full as we can. Unfortunately, it sucks. I hate doing that. I'd rather get rid of the stuff, but you have to work with what you're working with. In doing that, you are going to make a massive mess out of all the rest of the house. Even though the rest of the house is already messy and cluttered, you're going to add to that, but it's the only way to do it. You have to be unafraid to create a bigger mess elsewhere in order to clean the spot that you're currently trying to organize. But as you do that, more and more stuff gets packed up, more and more stuff gets organized, and the space will start to make itself available. I liken it to those old slide puzzles that you used to get when you were a kid, or I used to because I'm 1,000 years old, but it's like a 9 square board, but there are 8 pieces of the puzzle, and you have to manipulate those around and slide the little squares around until you can make the picture make sense. You're kind of doing that with objects in the house, just on a 3D level. It's also why I call it house Tetris, because you're trying to stack items so tightly against each other and on top of each other that it's like playing a giant game of Tetris in real life. I also sometimes call it House Mario because I'll grow a giant mustache and stomp on turtles. And if the house doesn't have turtles, I'll bring some. I'll bring some, son. Son? Anyway, sorry about that. That was silly. Apologies for being silly. One of the things that they're going to have to address if they end up getting him into treatment is not just the fact that he buys stuff, it's how much stuff that he's buying in bulk. And by that, I mean not just the amount of stuff he's bringing into his house, but he doesn't just buy one hat, he buys 30. He doesn't just buy one knife, he buys 10. if it's in bulk and he can get a good deal on it, it appears that he can't quite control himself. So I found things like an unopened box, like a case of fidget spinners. You know those lamps people used to make out of old Jack Daniels bottles where they'd cram a bunch of like mercury lights in the bottom and then turn it into a lamp? Like grade school kids used to do it for a shop project. He had at least a dozen of those, and they were all packed away in a box that was specifically meant for those things. So I think he may have picked those. If he didn't make it himself, he picked those up at like a yard sale or an estate sale or something. There was a box of like 50 or 60 coffee mugs, and there was so much ammunition. Like every time I pulled up a piece of clothing or moved another box, I found more and more and more ammunition. There was so much that if the zombie apocalypse ever happens, we're all meeting at that guy's house. I'm not making fun of him, by the way, for that. I'm just saying there was a whole bunch of it, to the point that I was like, damn, like even for being in the Midwest, damn. But a lot of this stuff can get super frustrating for the family members because they see him with a bathroom that's not functional, but he can't really afford to fix the bathroom and replace the flooring. But he does have thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff. Gold and silver commemorative coins, a jar of buffalo nickels, thousands of baseball cards. And I'm not just talking about him specifically when I'm making this point. Again, I'm not ripping on this guy. I'm saying this is what I see over and over again. So I'll go to a house that may have $10,000 worth of hoarded jewelry, but they don't have hot water. They'll have $5,000 worth of shoes, but they don't have electricity in half their house. I've helped out people who have had $10,000 to $20,000 worth of purses, but every single plumbing fixture in the house was broken. Everything that had a drain could not drain because the plumbing was snapped. And that's because you're not dealing with a neurotypical logic system. Your logic is different from their logic. It's built into the brain. You're dealing with a disorder that overrides everything, and that's why treatment is really, really important before you go into a house and clean it. Or in rare cases, they'll hit a rock bottom just like an addict and say, okay, I'm waking up. I can't take this anymore. Please help me. Please do something about this. That's rare, but it does happen. Anyway, I'm just trying to get you to understand why people with hoarding disorder function the way that they function. I'm not excusing their behavior any more than I would excuse the behavior of somebody who has depression. I think that far too many people search out blame in life and not trying to understand why people behave and function the way that they do. Because to me, you can't solve a problem if you don't understand the problem. So far in my life, I have done over 300 of these houses, and I have yet to find a single person who wanted to just be left alone. Not one person has said, I love the way I live, I'm happy, please don't touch anything. Those people do exist, but I haven't found one. In every case that I've worked on so far, they do not want to live that way, and they don't understand why they can't break out of the habit. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Members, I'll see you all on Wednesday. Everybody else, I'll see you next weekend. Later.